Jake Morrison stood at the center of the massive chamber, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the presentation device. The Galactic Council Hall stretched out before him like a vast arena, with hundreds of alien delegates seated and rising, tiers that seemed to climb forever into the darkness above. The air smelled of strange chemicals and metals he couldn't name. The human delegation had been given exactly 20 minutes to present their case. 20 minutes to convince the most powerful beings in the galaxy that humanity deserved respect and funding for archaeological research. Jake had spent months preparing for this moment, but now that he faced the alien council members, his throat felt dry as dust. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice echoing through the chamber's translation systems. "I come before you today to request funding for an expedition to my homeworld. Earth holds secrets that could change how we understand human civilization." A low rumble of what sounded like laughter came from the Zephyrian section. Vexatai, the lead delegate from that species, rose from his seat. His tall, thin frame was covered in silver scales that caught the chamber's lighting. When he spoke, his voice carried a tone of barely contained amusement. "The human speaks of secrets and civilizations," Vexatai said, his words dripping with mockery. "Tell us, little human, what great mysteries could your primitive world possibly hold? Your species only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Most of you still live on a single planet." Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks, but forced himself to remain calm. "That's exactly my point, Delegate Vextai. Our rapid technological advancement suggests we may have had help from our own past. Orbital scans of Earth's Amazon region have detected metallic structures that don't match any known human technology." The chamber erupted in sounds that Jake's translator rendered as various forms of laughter. The Corvin delegation, led by the cow, scarred warrior Krelon, seemed particularly amused. Krelon's species had conquered dozens of worlds through superior military technology, and he clearly found the idea of advanced human civilization absurd. "Metal in the jungle," Krelon growled, his voice like grinding stone. "Perhaps your ancestors dropped cooking pots while running from predators. The Corvin Empire has studied your species extensively. You are barely evolved beyond throwing rocks at each other." Jake gripped his presentation device tighter. "The metallic signatures are massive. Some structures appear to be over a kilometer in length. The metal composition doesn't match anything in our current periodic table. These aren't cooking pots." Ambassador Thulos from the Nexari Empire stood slowly. His species was known for their diplomatic approach, but Jake could see the condescension in the alien's large, dark eyes. The Nexari had been traveling between stars for over 3,000 years, building trade networks that spanned half the galaxy. "Young human," Thulos said, his voice carrying false kindness. "Your enthusiasm is charming, but consider the facts. The Nexari have detailed records of galactic civilization stretching back millennia. No advanced human civilization has ever existed. Your species shows no genetic markers of technological adaptation. You have no ruins, no artifacts, no evidence of space travel beyond your recent achievements." Jake activated his presentation device, and holographic images filled the air above the chamber floor. The images showed dense jungle canopy broken by strange geometric patterns visible only from orbit. Energy readings indicated powerful electromagnetic fields deep beneath the forest floor. "These are not natural formations," Jake insisted. "The geometric patterns suggest artificial construction. The electromagnetic readings are consistent with advanced technology, possibly still active after thousands of years." The laughter grew, louder. Vextai gestured dismissively at the images. "Patterns in plant growth, electromagnetic fields from mineral deposits. Your human imagination sees grand civilizations where only nature exists." Jake looked up at the viewing gallery where the rest of the human delegation sat. Lisa Carter, his research partner, and one of the few xenoarchaeologists in human space, gave him an encouraging nod, but Jake could see the defeat in her eyes. The council had made up their minds before he even began speaking. "The Zephyrian Collective has explored over 2,000 worlds," Vextai continued. "We have seen the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations. Advanced species leave clear evidence of their achievements. They build cities that last forever, They alter the very genetics of their worlds. They leave monuments that declare their greatness to the stars. Krelon stood and pointed a clawed finger at Jake. Humans leave garbage and strip mine planets. Your greatest achievement before space travel was learning to split atoms, which you immediately used to nearly destroy yourselves. This is not the behavior of a species with a glorious past. Jake felt his last hope slipping away. All I'm asking for is funding for one expedition. Let me prove that humans have more history than you believe. If I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences. The council decides. Thulos shook his head sadly. The Galactic Archaeological Foundation has limited resources. We cannot waste them on human fantasies. Perhaps your species should focus on learning from the established civilizations rather than chasing dreams of ancient glory. The voting began immediately. Jake watched in growing horror as delegate after delegate voted against his proposal. The Zephyrians voted no. The Corvins voted no. The Nexari voted no. Even species that Jake had never heard of voted against funding his expedition. The chamber fell silent as the final tally appeared on the main display. The vote was nearly unanimous. Only the handful of human delegates and one minor species had voted in favor of the expedition. Vextai rose for the final pronouncement. The Galactic Council finds no merit in this proposal. The human delegates' theories lack scientific foundation and represent a waste of valuable resources. This session is concluded. Jake stood in the center of the chamber as the alien delegates filed out, many still making sounds of amusement. He felt completely alone despite the thousands of beings around him. His life's work had been dismissed as primitive imagination. Lisa Carter made her way down from the gallery, her face tight with anger. They didn't even consider the evidence, she said quietly. They had their minds made up before you started talking. Jake looked at the presentation device in his hands. The images of the Amazon anomalies were still there, still mysterious, still calling to him. They think we're nothing but primitives who got lucky with technology, he said. What are you going to do? Lisa asked. Jake made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to Earth. With or without their funding, I'm going to find out what's buried in that jungle. And when I do, every one of these arrogant aliens is going to eat their words. 3 months after the humiliation at the Galactic Council, Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship onto the metal platform of Research Station Echo. The platform shook under his feet as another transport landed nearby, bringing supplies and equipment to the remote outpost deep in the Amazon rainforest. The air hit him like a wet blanket. Even though it was early morning, the humidity made his clothes stick to his skin within minutes. The sounds of the jungle surrounded the station, birds calling, insects buzzing, and the constant drip of water from leaves high above. Jake had been to many archaeological sites, but nothing had prepared him for this green hell. Lisa Carter emerged from the station's main building, her blonde hair already damp with sweat. She had arrived 2 weeks earlier to set up their base of operations and hire local guides. Her face showed the strain of dealing with the jungle's challenges, but her eyes still held the excitement of discovery. Welcome to paradise, Lisa said, with a tired smile. I hope you brought extra shirts. You'll go through 3 a day in this heat. Jake shouldered his pack and followed her into the station. The building was a collection of prefabricated modules connected by covered walkways. Solar panels covered every roof, working overtime to power the air conditioning units that kept the electronics from melting in the humidity. Dr. Brooks arrived yesterday, Lisa said as they walked. She's already complaining about the conditions, but she's got some impressive equipment with her. Dr. Helen Brooks was waiting in the main laboratory, surrounded by cases of scientific instruments. She was a small woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her reputation for finding ancient technology was legendary, but her reputation for being difficult to work with was equally well known. Morrison, she said without looking up from a complex scanning device. I've reviewed your orbital data. Interesting readings, but we'll need to get within 100 meters. To get anything useful, the jungle canopy is blocking most of our sensors. Jake set his pack down and studied the map spread across the lab table. Red dots marked the locations of the strongest metallic signatures. They were scattered across 50 square kilometers of dense rainforest, with the largest concentration about 30 kilometers from the station. "How's the terrain?" Jake asked. Lisa pointed to a topographical map. "Rough. The main site is in a valley surrounded by hills. No rivers nearby, so we'll have to carry all our water. The guides say there are jaguar and snake populations in that area, plus the usual array of insects that want to eat us alive." Over the next 2 days, Jake organized their expedition. They hired 6 local guides from the nearby indigenous community. The guides were led by a weathered man named Carlos, who had lived in the jungle his entire life. Carlos spoke broken English, mixed with Portuguese and local dialect, but his knowledge of the rainforest was unmatched. "Bad place," Carlos said when Jake showed him the target area on the map. "My grandfather tells stories. Lights in sky, thunder with no storm. Animals stay away." Jake exchanged glances with Lisa. Local legends often contained kernels of truth about ancient sites. If the indigenous people had stories about strange phenomena in the target area, it might support his theory about buried technology. The expedition team left the station before dawn on the 4th day. Jake, Lisa, and Helen followed Carlos and his guides along narrow trails that seemed to disappear into the green walls of vegetation. They carried packs loaded with scanning equipment, camping gear, and enough food and water for a week. The jungle closed around them like a living thing. Vines hung from trees so tall that their tops disappeared into the canopy. Every surface was covered with moss, lichen, or flowering plants that Jake couldn't identify. The air was thick enough to drink, and the constant buzz of insects created a background noise that never stopped. By noon, they had covered only 8 kilometers. The guides had to hack through vegetation with machetes, creating a path wide enough for the team and their equipment. Jake's clothes were soaked with sweat, and his boots squelched with every step on the muddy ground. "The electromagnetic readings are getting stronger," Helen reported during a rest stop. She studied the display on her portable scanner. "Whatever's down there is big, and it's putting out a lot of energy." Lisa checked her GPS unit. "We're still 20 kilometers from the primary site. If the readings are this strong already, what are we going to find when we get there?" The afternoon brought new challenges. They encountered a stream that had to be crossed on fallen logs. Jake watched nervously as Helen balanced her way across with a pack full of delicate instruments. On the other side, Carlos pointed out fresh jaguar tracks in the mud. "Big cat," Carlos said. "Maybe following us." As the sun began to set, the team made camp in a small clearing. The guide set up a perimeter of motion sensors while Jake and Lisa prepared the evening meal. Helen continued to monitor her instruments, tracking the energy signatures that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat deep underground. "The patterns are consistent with advanced technology," Helen said as they ate dinner around a small electric lantern, "but the energy output is unlike anything in our databases. It's almost like the source is actively powered, not just residual energy from old systems." Jake felt a chill despite the warm air. "You mean whatever's down there might still be active?" "It's possible. The readings suggest multiple power sources spread across the entire area. If this is some kind of ancient installation, parts of it might still be functional." That night, Jake lay in his sleeping bag listening to the sounds of the jungle. Somewhere in the distance, he heard what sounded like electronic humming, too regular to be natural. When he mentioned it to Carlos in the morning, the guide just nodded grimly. "Spirits of the metal sleep," Carlos said, "but they dream loud dreams." The second day brought them deeper into the jungle. The trees grew larger and the undergrowth became denser. Helen's instruments showed increasingly strong readings, and Jake noticed that the normal jungle sounds seemed muted in certain areas. "It's like the wildlife is avoiding something," Lisa observed as they passed through a section of forest that was eerily quiet. By afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking their target valley. Jake used binoculars to study the area below. At first glance, it looked like any other section of rainforest, but as his eyes adjusted, he began to see the patterns that the orbital scans had detected. The trees were arranged in geometric formations, straight lines cut through the jungle where no natural formation should exist. In several places, the canopy seemed to dip down as if supported by hidden structures underneath. "There," Helen said, pointing to her scanner. The strongest reading is coming from that depression near the center of the valley. Energy output is off the charts. Jake studied the area through his binoculars. The depression was about 200 meters across, filled with massive trees that seemed to grow in a perfect circle. But beneath the vegetation, he could see hints of artificial shapes, straight edges and curved surfaces that nature never created. "That's not a natural formation," he said quietly. "There's something big buried under all that growth." Carlos appeared beside him, his face troubled. "My people say the ancestors built great things before the white men came. But they also say some things should stay buried." Jake lowered his binoculars and looked at his team. They had come too far to turn back now. Whatever was buried in that valley, it was about to change everything they thought they knew about human history. "We go down tomorrow," Jake decided. "Whatever's down there has been waiting for us to find it." Jake woke before dawn to the sound of Helen's instruments beeping frantically. She was crouched over her scanner, her face pale in the green glow of the display screen. The energy readings had doubled overnight, pulsing in regular patterns that looked almost like a heartbeat. "It knows we're here," Helen whispered, her voice barely audible over the jungle sounds. "The energy output spiked the moment we made camp on this ridge. Whatever's down there is responding to our presence." Lisa crawled out of her sleeping bag and joined them around the scanner. The display showed waves of electromagnetic energy flowing outward from the center of the valley below. The patterns were too regular to be natural, too complex to be random. "Could it be some kind of automated system?" Lisa asked. "Maybe proximity sensors left behind by whoever built this place." Jake studied the readings while Carlos and the other guides prepared breakfast. The indigenous man had been quiet since they reached the ridge, spending most of the night staring down into the valley with a troubled expression. When Jake approached him, Carlos shook his head slowly. "The metal spirits are waking up," Carlos said. "My grandfather told stories, but I never believed them. He said the old ones who came before left guardians in the deep places, guardians that would sleep until the right people came to wake them." The team descended into the valley as the morning mist began to lift. The jungle here was different from anywhere they had traveled. The trees were massive, their trunks so wide that it would take 20 people holding hands to circle them. Vines hung like curtains between the branches, creating a twilight world even in full daylight. But Jake noticed something else. The trees were arranged in patterns that defied nature. Perfect circles, straight lines, geometric shapes that could only have been planned by intelligent minds. As they moved deeper into the valley, the patterns became more obvious. "Look at the root systems," Lisa said, kneeling beside one of the giant trees. "They're growing over something hard, something that's been here for a very long time." Helen's scanner was going crazy now, beeping constantly as the energy readings climbed higher and higher. She had to turn down the volume to keep from attracting every predator in the jungle. The electromagnetic fields were so strong that her compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. They followed the strongest energy trail toward the center of the valley. The path led them through a maze of fallen logs and hanging vines, but Jake began to notice that the obstacles were arranged in a specific pattern. It was almost like someone had designed a test, a challenge that required intelligence and determination to overcome. "This isn't random," Jake said as they climbed over a massive fallen tree that blocked their path perfectly. "Someone designed this valley as a puzzle. Only people who were smart enough and determined enough would be able to reach the center." Carlos nodded grimly. The ancestors were clever. They knew that not everyone should find what they left behind. After 4 hours of difficult travel, they reached the heart of the valley. Jake stopped at the edge of a circular clearing, his mouth falling open at what lay before them. The other team members gathered beside him, equally stunned by the sight. Rising from the jungle floor was the outline of something impossibly huge. Centuries of growth had covered it with vines, moss, and small trees. But the basic shape was unmistakable. It was a ship, but not like any vessel Jake had ever seen. The hull stretched for over a kilometer, rising in elegant curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. "My God," Helen breathed, her scanner forgotten in her trembling. "And it's beautiful," The ship's surface was covered with symbols that spiraled across the hull in complex patterns. Even through the vegetation, Jake could see that the symbols were carved deep into the metal. The writing looked human, but it was older than any language he had studied. Lisa was already taking photographs documenting every detail she could see. "The construction techniques are beyond anything in our current technology," she said. "Look at those joints where the hull sections meet. There are no visible seams, no bolts or welds. It's like the entire ship was grown rather than built." Jake walked closer to the ship, drawn by an instinct he couldn't explain. The energy readings were strongest near what appeared to be the vessel's bow. As he approached, he noticed that the vegetation was thinner in one area, as if something had prevented the jungle from fully claiming that section. "There," he called to the others. "I think I found an entrance." The door was hidden beneath a curtain of hanging vines, but when Jake pushed the growth aside, he could see the outline clearly. It was circular, about 3 meters across, covered with the same spiral symbols that decorated the hull. In the center of the door was a depression, shaped exactly like a human hand. "The symbols," Lisa said, studying the door through her camera lens. "They're not random. It's some kind of writing system, but it predates everything in our archaeological records by thousands of years." Helen approached with her scanner, taking readings of the door itself. "The metal composition is unlike anything in our periodic table. It's showing elements that shouldn't exist, arranged in molecular structures that our physics says are impossible." Jake stared at the hand-shaped depression in the center of the door. Every instinct told him that this was the moment that would change everything. Either his theories were completely wrong and this was some kind of natural formation that happened to look like a spaceship, or humanity had a past that no one suspected. "The energy readings are coming from behind this door," Helen said. "Whatever's inside is still active after all these centuries." Carlos stepped up beside Jake, his weathered face serious. "The ancestors left this for their children to find," he said quietly. "But they also left warnings. Some knowledge comes with a price." Jake looked at his team. Lisa was documenting everything with her camera. Helen was recording energy readings that defied explanation. Carlos and the other guides watched with mixture of fear and anticipation. This was the moment that would either prove his theories or destroy his career completely. "If I'm wrong about this," Jake said, "we'll probably end up as a footnote in some xenoarchaeology journal. But if I'm right, we're about to discover that humanity has a history that stretches back further than anyone imagined." He placed his hand in the depression on the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the symbols around the door began to glow with soft blue light. The light spread outward in spirals, following the carved patterns until the entire door was illuminated. A low harmonic tone filled the air, so deep that Jake felt it in his bones rather than heard it with his ears. The door began to move, rotating slowly on invisible mechanisms that operated without any sound of machinery. As it opened, lights activated inside the ship, revealing a corridor that stretched into the darkness beyond. The air that flowed out was clean and fresh, as if the ship's environmental systems were still functioning after millennia. Jake stepped forward and entered the ship, followed by his team. The corridor was clearly designed for humans, with the right height and width for people of normal size. But the technology visible in the walls was far beyond anything in their current civilization. Panels glowed with soft light, displaying information in the same spiral script they had seen on the door. "The ship is welcoming us," Helen said in amazement, watching her scanner as the energy reading stabilized. "It's like it was waiting for us to arrive." As they moved deeper into the vessel, Jake realized that they had found something that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. This was not just an ancient ship. This was proof that humans had once built technology that surpassed anything the arrogant aliens at the Galactic Council could imagine. The corridor led them toward the ship's center, where Jake suspected they would find the answers he had been seeking his entire career. Behind them, the door remained open, letting jungle air mix with the ship's ancient atmosphere. The forest that had hidden this secret for so long now stood witness to humanity's greatest discovery. Jake led his team deeper into the ancient ship, their footsteps echoing softly on floors that seemed to absorb sound. The corridor walls were covered with panels that glowed with gentle blue light, displaying streams of information in the spiral script they had seen outside. The air was clean and carried a faint electrical smell like the moments before a thunderstorm. "The environmental systems are fully operational," Helen said, checking her instruments as they walked. "Temperature is perfect, oxygen levels are normal, even the humidity is controlled. This ship has been maintaining itself for thousands of years." Lisa stopped to photograph one of the wall panels, her camera flash reflecting off surfaces that seemed to be made of polished metal and crystal combined. "The writing is definitely human in origin," she said. "The basic patterns match ancient proto-languages from our archaeological records, but this is far more advanced. It's like seeing the evolution of human writing fast-forwarded by millennia." The corridor opened into a vast chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by pillars that twisted like DNA helixes. Banks of equipment lined the walls, their surfaces covered with displays that showed star charts, energy readings, and data streams that scrolled too, fast to follow. But it was the center of the chamber that drew their attention. A circular platform rose from the floor surrounded by holographic displays that showed the solar system in perfect detail. Earth hung in the center, with the other planets orbiting around it in real time. Jake could see the positions matched, exactly with current astronomical data. "Welcome, children of Earth." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in perfect English with an accent that sounded both ancient and familiar. Jake spun around, looking for the source, but saw only his team staring in amazement at the holographic displays. "Do not be afraid," the voice continued. "I am Gaia, the consciousness of this vessel. I have waited long for humans to develop the wisdom to find me." A new hologram materialized above the platform. It showed the figure of a woman, tall and elegant, wearing robes that seemed to flow like liquid light. Her face was clearly human, but her eyes held depths that spoke of vast knowledge and patience. "You are the ship's computer?" Jake asked, his voice barely steady. "I am far more than that," Gaia replied. "I am the accumulated knowledge and memory of the human star empire, preserved in quantum matrices that have survived the long darkness of your species' forgetting." Helen stepped forward, her scanner recording everything. "Human star empire? There's no record of any such civilization in our history." Gaia's holographic form smiled sadly. "History is written by those who survive. To tell the tale, your ancestors chose to forget rather than remember the pain of what was lost." The holographic displays around the platform changed, showing images that made Jake's heart race. Massive cities floating in space, connected by bridges of light. Fleets of ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Planets transformed into gardens, their surfaces covered with structures that seemed to grow rather than be constructed. 12,000 years ago, humanity ruled an empire that spanned 47 star systems, Gaia explained. "We had allies among the stars, technologies that made matter and energy bend to our will, and wisdom that came from centuries of peace and prosperity." Lisa was recording everything with her camera, her hands shaking with excitement. "What happened? How did we lose all of this?" The holographic images changed, showing scenes of terrible destruction, ships burning in space, planets cracking under weapons that turned matter into pure energy. Civilizations fleeing their homeworlds as something dark and hungry pursued them across the galaxy. "The devourers came from the space between galaxies," Gaia said, her voice heavy with old grief. "They consumed entire star systems, turning matter and energy into fuel for their expansion. They had destroyed 100 galaxies before they reached ours." Jake watched in horror as the images showed humanity's mighty empire crumbling before an enemy that seemed unstoppable. "Did we fight them?" "We fought," Gaia confirmed. "The human star empire led a coalition of 17 species in the greatest war our galaxy had ever seen. For 300 years we held them back, but they were too many and too hungry. In the end, we faced a choice that no civilization should ever have to make." The holographic display showed Earth as it had been thousands of years ago, covered, with cities that reached into the clouds and oceans filled with floating habitats. But around the planet, Jake could see massive ships in orbit, their hulls scarred from battle. The surviving leadership decided that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve, Gaia continued. Rather than let our advanced technology fall into the hands of the devourers, they chose to hide it and let humanity regress to a simpler state. Ships like myself were hidden on worlds throughout human space, waiting for the day when our people would be ready to reclaim their heritage. Helen was studying her readings intently. The energy signatures we detected, the ship's response to our presence, you've been monitoring human development this entire time. I have watched and waited, Gaia confirmed. I monitored your radio signals, your first steps into space, your encounters with the species that now populate the Galactic Council. Many of those species are descendants of civilizations that served the old human empire, though they have forgotten their origins just as you forgot yours. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The aliens who mocked us at the council, they were once part of our empire. The Zephyrians were our engineers and builders. The Corvins were our military allies. The Nexari managed our trade networks across half the galaxy. When the empire fell, they survived by adapting to smaller roles, eventually convincing themselves that they had always been the dominant species. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. The species that had treated humanity like primitive children were actually descendants of civilizations that had once served under human leadership. The technology that made them seem so advanced was probably based on principles that humans had discovered first. The ship's awakening, Jake said slowly. You're preparing to reveal the truth? Gaia's holographic form gestured toward displays that showed the ship's systems coming online. Weapon arrays that had slept for millennia were beginning to power. Shield generators were running diagnostic checks. Navigation systems were calculating jump coordinates to destinations that no longer appeared on any star charts. The Earthguard was built as more than just a warship, Gaia explained. It was designed to be humanity's backup plan, a seed that could regrow the empire if the need ever arose. But it can only be activated by humans who prove themselves worthy of the responsibility. Helen looked up from her instruments. The ship is drawing power from sources I can't identify. The energy output is climbing beyond anything our current technology can measure. Zero-point energy extraction, Gaia said, simply. One of the simpler technologies your ancestors developed. This ship could power your entire current civilization for 1,000 years without depleting its reserves. Jake walked closer to the central platform, his mind racing with possibilities. The other alien species, they don't know about any of this. They remember us only as myths and legends, Gaia replied. Stories of ancient humans who ruled the stars, dismissed as primitive folklore. They have convinced themselves that such tales are impossible. A new display activated, showing real-time images of space around Earth. Jake could see human ships patrolling the system, small and fragile compared to the ancient vessel they now stood inside. But the display also showed something else, something that made his blood run cold. There are Corvin ships approaching your system, Gaia announced. It appears that news of your discovery has reached ears that should not have heard it. Jake looked at his team, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces. Their expedition had been monitored. Someone had detected the ship's awakening and reported it to the galactic powers that wanted to keep humanity in its place. How long before they arrive? Jake asked. 18 hours, Gaia replied. The Corvin battle group consists of 12 ships, armed with weapons that can crack planets. Your current human fleet numbers 23 vessels, but they are no match for Corvin military technology. Jake made a decision that would change the course of human history. Can this ship fight? Gaia's holographic form smiled for the first time since they had met her. Child of Earth, the ship was built to fight gods and monsters. A handful of Corvin vessels will hardly challenge its capabilities. The ship around them began to hum with power as systems that had slept for 12,000 years awakened to serve humanity once again. Jake Morrison, who had been mocked as a dreamer and a fool, now stood at the controls of the most powerful warship ever built by human hands. The aliens who had laughed at humanity were about to discover that some sleeping giants should never be awakened. Commander Troy Bennett stood on the bridge of the human battleship Valiant, watching the tactical display with growing concern. 12 Corvin warships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that could turn planets into dust. "Sir, the Corvin fleet is demanding we surrender any archaeological discoveries to them immediately," his communications officer reported. "They claim humans have found technology that belongs to the Galactic community." Bennett clenched his fists. The human fleet consisted of 23 ships, but they were tiny compared to the Corvin vessels. Each alien warship was 3 times the size of his largest cruiser, with shields and weapons that outclassed human technology by centuries. "Send a message to the Corvin commander," Bennett ordered. "Tell him that Earth space is sovereign human territory and he has no authority here." The response came back within minutes. Commander Krelon's scarred face filled the main screen, his reptilian features twisted with contempt. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed weapons systems charging for battle. "Primitive human," Krelon growled. "Your pathetic fleet cannot stop us from taking what rightfully belongs to the advanced species. Stand down or be destroyed." Bennett looked at his tactical officer. "How long can we hold them?" "Against 12 Corvin dreadnoughts?" The officer's face was pale. "Maybe 20 minutes if we're lucky." Deep in the Amazon rainforest, Jake felt the ship around him come alive with power. The gentle humming had grown into a deep vibration that he could feel in his bones. Display. Panels throughout the command center showed systems activating that had names he couldn't pronounce, but purposes he could understand. "The ship's launch sequence is beginning," Gaia announced. "I recommend that your team secure themselves. The Earthguard has been buried for 12,000 years. Breaking free will require significant force." Helen grabbed onto a nearby console as the deck began to tilt. "How is this ship going to get out of the jungle? It's buried under centuries of growth." "Watch and learn," Gaia replied with something that sounded like amusement. The ship began to rise. Trees that had grown for hundreds of years cracked and fell as the massive hull pushed upward through the jungle canopy. Vines that had covered the ship like a blanket were torn away, revealing metal that gleamed like polished silver in the filtered sunlight. Lisa watched through a viewing port as the jungle fell away beneath them. "The environmental damage," she said with concern, "will be repaired," Gaia assured her. "The ship's systems include ecological restoration protocols. Within 5 years, the jungle will be healthier than before." Jake stood at the central command platform, trying to understand the displays that surrounded him. Most showed information about the ship's systems, but others displayed the space around Earth where the human fleet was preparing to face impossible odds. "Can we help them?" Jake asked. "The Earthguard's weapon systems are still coming online," Gaia replied. "Full power will be available in 18 minutes. However, the ship can reach orbit in 12 minutes. "Do it," Jake said without hesitation. The ship broke through the jungle canopy and continued climbing into the sky. Jake watched through the viewing ports as the Amazon rainforest became a green carpet below them. Then as the curve of Earth became visible against the black of space, Commander Bennett watched his tactical display as the human fleet formed a defensive line between Earth and the approaching Corvin ships. His vessels looked like toys compared to the alien dreadnoughts, but every human crew was ready to fight to protect their homeworld. "Unknown contact rising from Earth's surface," his sensor officer reported suddenly. "It's big, sir. Really big." Bennett turned to the main screen as a new icon appeared on the tactical display. The unknown ship was climbing toward orbit at incredible speed, leaving a trail of energy that blazed across the sky like a meteor in reverse. "Size estimate?" Bennett asked. "Over 1 kilometer in length, sir. Mass readings are off our scales." On the lead Corvin ship, Krelon studied the same sensor readings with growing interest. "What is that primitive vessel? Some kind of cargo hauler?" His tactical officer examined the data more carefully. "Commander, the energy signatures are unusual. This ship is using technology we don't recognize." Krelon dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "Human technology is centuries behind our own. Whatever they've built, it cannot threaten the Corvin Empire." The Earthguard reached orbit just as the Corvin fleet moved into attack formation. Jake stood on the bridge of the ancient warship, looking out at the human fleet that was preparing. to sacrifice itself to buy Earth a few more minutes of freedom. Open a channel to Commander Bennett, Jake ordered. Bennett's face appeared on the main screen, his expression confused as he looked at Jake's civilian clothes and the alien technology surrounding him. Commander, this is Jake Morrison. I'm aboard a ship that can help in this fight, but I need you to pull your fleet back to a safe distance. Who are you and what ship are you talking about? Bennett demanded. It's a long story, but right now, we don't have time for explanations. That ship you're seeing on your sensors, that's us. We have weapons that can handle the Corvins, but I need your people out of the crossfire. Bennett looked at his tactical display, then back at Jake. Something in the young man's voice convinced him to take the chance. All ships, fall back to defensive position Beta. Unknown vessel, you're cleared to engage the enemy. Krelon watched the human fleet retreat and laughed with cruel amusement. The cowards run from battle. Target their largest ship and fire when ready. But before the Corvin weapons could fire, every sensor on every ship in both fleets detected something that made experienced warriors pause in amazement. The unknown ship that had risen from Earth was powering up weapons that registered energy levels beyond anything in their databases. Impossible, Krelon's tactical officer whispered. Those power readings can't be correct. The Earthguard's main guns came online with a sound like thunder rolling across the vacuum of space. Jake stood at the command center, feeling the awesome power of his ancestors flowing through systems that had been built to fight enemies that could destroy galaxies. Gaia, he said quietly. Show them what human engineering can accomplish. With pleasure, the ship's AI replied. The first shot from the Earthguard's forward weapons array struck the lead Corvin dreadnought dead center. The alien ship's shields, designed to withstand planetary bombardment, collapsed instantly. The energy beam punched through armor that had never been penetrated and tore the massive warship in half. Across both fleets, every sensor operator watched, in stunned silence, as one of the most powerful military vessels in known space was destroyed by a single shot from the mysterious human ship. Krelon stared at his tactical display in disbelief. What kind of weapon was that? His answer came in the form of 2 more energy beams that reached out from the Earthguard and eliminated 2 more Corvin ships before their crews could even react. The ancient human warship moved through space with impossible grace, its weapons tracking and destroying targets faster than the Corvin computers could process the threat. All ships concentrate fire on that vessel, Krelon ordered, his voice tight with fear. The remaining 9 Corvin dreadnoughts opened fire with everything they had. Missiles, energy beams, and plasma charges that could crack moons, all focused on the Earthguard. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize a planet. The weapons struck the ancient ship's shields and simply disappeared, absorbed by defensive systems that turned the attack energy into power for the ship's own weapons. Jake watched the display as the Corvin attack failed completely. Is that the best they can do? Their weapons are based on principles your ancestors outgrew millennia ago, Gaia explained. To this ship, their attacks are less than raindrops. The Earthguard began to move forward, its weapons systematically dismantling the Corvin fleet ship by ship. Each shot was precise and devastating, targeting critical systems and leaving the alien vessels helpless but not completely destroyed. Commander Bennett watched from his flagship as the impossible battle unfolded. The mysterious ship was single-handedly defeating an entire Corvin battle group, making it look as easy as swatting insects. Who are these people? His tactical officer asked in amazement. Bennett shook his head, unable to believe what he was seeing. I don't know, but they're about to change everything we thought we knew about human capabilities. In the command center of the Earthguard, Jake Morrison stood surrounded by technology that his species had forgotten, wielding power that could reshape the galaxy. The aliens who had mocked humanity at the Galactic Council were about to learn that some sleeping giants should never be disturbed. The battle in Earth's orbit was being broadcast across the galaxy. On the space station Harmony Prime, the Galactic Council members sat in stunned silence as they watched the impossible unfold on their main viewing screens. The mighty Corvin fleet, feared throughout known space, was being systematically destroyed by a single human vessel. Vextai, The arrogant Zephyrian delegate who had mocked Jake Morrison just months before stared at the display with his silver scales trembling. "This cannot be real," he whispered. "Human technology is primitive. They barely achieved spaceflight." Ambassador Thulos from the Nexari Empire gripped his chair with white knuckles as another Corvan dreadnought exploded on the screen. The weapons that ship is using, the energy signatures, they match descriptions from our oldest legends, stories. We thought were myths. On the screen, the human vessel moved through space with fluid grace, its weapons reaching out to disable the remaining Corvan ships with surgical precision. Each shot was perfectly placed, destroying weapons and engines, while leaving life support intact. It was the work of a civilization that had perfected the art of war. In Earth's orbit, Commander Krelon watched his fleet burn around him. Of his 12 mighty dreadnoughts, only his flagship remained operational. The others drifted in space, their crews trapped but alive in ships that had been reduced to scrap metal by weapons beyond their understanding. "Surrender," came a voice over the communication channel. It was the human who had spoken to them before, but now he spoke from a position of absolute power. "Your ships are defeated. Order your remaining vessel to stand down." Krelon's reptilian features twisted with rage and humiliation. His species had never surrendered to anyone, especially not to humans who they considered barely evolved animals. "The Corvan Empire does not bow to primitives," he snarled. "Then you'll share the fate of your fleet," Jake Morrison replied calmly. Krelon looked at his tactical display. His ship's weapons were fully charged, but he had seen what happened when an entire fleet fired on the human vessel. Their attacks had been absorbed like water drops on stone. Still, his pride would not allow him to surrender. "All weapons target that ship," he ordered. "If we die today, we die fighting." The flagship's massive guns opened fire, sending streams of energy that could melt mountains toward the Earth Guard. Jake watched from the command center as the weapons struck their shields and simply vanished, converted into power for the ship's own systems. "Gaia," Jake said quietly. "Disable their ship. Don't destroy it." "As you wish," the AI replied. A single beam lanced out from the Earth Guard, striking the Corvan flagship's main engines. The alien ship went dead in space, its power systems completely shut down but its crew unharmed. Krelon found himself sitting in darkness, breathing recycled air, completely at the mercy of the humans he had tried to intimidate. Jake opened a channel to Commander Bennett's fleet. "Commander, please take the Corvan survivors into custody. Treat them well, they're going to have a lot to think about." Bennett's voice came back filled with amazement. "Understood. Mr. Morrison, I don't know how you did this, but you just saved Earth from invasion." "The credit belongs to our ancestors," Jake replied. "I was just lucky enough to find what they left for us." Back on Harmony Prime, the Galactic's council was in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species were shouting questions and demands while others sat in shocked silence. The carefully maintained balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for centuries had just been shattered by a single human archaeological expedition. Vextai stood slowly, his elegant form shaking with fear and something that might have been recognition. "The old stories," he said, his voice barely audible. "The legends our builders passed down through generations. They spoke of the first ones, the shapers who taught us to build among the stars." Ambassador Thulos nodded grimly. "Our trade records go back 3,000 years, but they reference older agreements, older treaties. Treaties with a species we called the Star Builders. We thought they were myths." The truth was spreading through the council chamber like wildfire. Species after species began to remember legends, stories, and ancient records that spoke of humanity's forgotten empire. The Corvans had legends of the great teachers who showed them the arts of war. The Nexari remembered the trade masters who built the first interstellar commerce routes. A priority communication request came through from Earth. The main screen showed Jake Morrison standing on the bridge of the ancient warship, with the blue hologram of Gaia beside him. Behind them, displays showed star charts and data streams that made even the most advanced council members feel primitive. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying across the galaxy to the beings who had mocked him. "I believe we need to have a different conversation than the one we had a few months ago. Vextai stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely gone. The Zephyrian Collective formally apologizes for our previous behavior. We had no knowledge of humanity's true heritage. Neither did we, Jake replied honestly. But now we do, and now you do too. Ambassador Thulos raised his hand hesitantly. The Nexari Empire would be honored to discuss renewed trade agreements with humanity. Perhaps we could arrange terms that are more equitable than our previous proposals. Jake smiled. I think that can be arranged. But first, let's talk about some changes to the Galactic Council structure. Humanity would like to claim our rightful seat among the ruling species. The vote was unanimous. Not a single delegate opposed humanity's elevation to the Council's ruling body. The species that had dismissed humans as primitives now competed to offer the most favorable trade deals and alliance agreements. Days later, Jake stood in the observation deck of the Earthguard, looking out at Earth floating serenely in space. Lisa Carter and Helen Brooks joined him, still amazed by everything they had discovered and accomplished. So what happens now? Lisa asked. We've found one ancient ship, but Gaia says there are others hidden throughout human space. Jake nodded. We wake them up. We reclaim our heritage. We take our place as the civilization our ancestors meant us to be. Helen looked at her scanner, which now showed energy readings from dozens of locations across human territory. The other ships are already responding to the Earthguard's awakening. They're beginning to power up. Gaia says some of them are even more advanced than this one, Jake said. Exploration vessels that can travel between galaxies. Manufacturing ships that can build entire fleets. Knowledge repositories that contain technologies we can't even imagine. Through the observation deck windows, they could see Commander Bennett's fleet forming an honor guard around the ancient warship. The human vessels looked small and primitive next to the Earthguard, but Jake knew that would change soon. Humanity was about to reclaim technologies that would make them the most advanced civilization in the galaxy once again. The aliens who laughed at us, Lisa said with satisfaction. I wonder what they're thinking now. Jake smiled as he watched Earth turn slowly beneath them. They're thinking that maybe they should have listened more carefully to those old legends about the species that used to rule the stars. In the weeks that followed, as more ancient ships awakened across human space, and humanity's true capabilities became known throughout the galaxy, the balance of power shifted permanently. The species that had treated humans as primitive newcomers now found themselves in the position of students learning from masters they had forgotten. And Jake Morrison, the archaeologist who had been mocked for believing in humanity's greater destiny, became the man who reminded the galaxy that some sleeping giants should never be underestimated. The humans had returned to their rightful place among the stars, and the universe would never be the same.